Yeah, on today's show, I'm turning over the host duties to my friend and producer, JD Reager, so that I can be the guest for a state of the podcast reflection, if you will. We'll talk about last summer's podcast, Road Trip Out West, how my book is progressing, and where things stand on the Mid-South Coliseum. All that and more on Champions of the Lost Causes. And with that, I'll turn it over to JD.
Beautifully read, Marvin.
Thank you. I can read.
Well, thanks for the introduction. We're now 58 episodes into the podcast, and I haven't overseen all 58, but I've overseen the last, 20 or so?
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling this far into the show about what you've done so far?
Yeah. Well, the original reason for the podcast was I didn't want Champions of the Lost Causes, the book, to be only a reflection or only be informed by my own cause work, reopening, first saving and then reopening the Mid-South Coliseum. So I wanted to interview people about other causes that they championed. So I wanted that to inform my work. And I mean, I have a journalism degree. I'm a curious person. So it's been fun. On a basic level, I started down this road because I thought the idea of interviewing other people about their cause-based work would be fun, and it has proven to be so. It has also taught me a lot about why people champion causes. Not all people champion causes for the same reasons, at least not completely. But over 58 episodes, you do learn that there are some common features of a champion's journey, so to speak. So,
such as?
Yeah, so playing the long game, right? Like weathering adversity is one of the main hallmarks. A desire to leave the world a better place for your having lived is a common theme. So it has done what I'd hoped it would do at the outset, which is to give me a better understanding about those central questions that I got interested in, which are, why do people champion causes? What sustains them, and what helps them succeed? And the podcast has been a lot of fun so far. And I feel like as the show has progressed, I've learned something at every step. You know, I started with Gil Worth and the OAM Podcast Network. I did some interviews by myself via Zoom during the pandemic. And then at every step, I've tried to say, how can I make the show better? And obviously there are people with like you guys with better skills than me on the recording end of things. So I want the show to sound better and to be better.
You should probably also mention Ryan Azada, who did the music to the show and was also kind of your interim producer between me and Gil.
No, thank you for saying that. Shout out to Ryan Azada for sure. Ryan and I reconnected, probably not immediately in the pandemic, but in that kind of like second year. Both of us were kind of like somewhat underemployed and doing some project work here and there. And he and I came back together as friends. And I owe a huge debt to Ryan because he really helped me see a few things. He gave me an objectivity that I didn't have. You do as well. But I mean, Ryan was key during a key part of evolving the podcast for sure.
How would you say the show has grown and that you have grown as an interviewer since, from episode 1 to 58?
Yeah. Well, at the outset, I made a presumption. I assumed that most causes would kind of fit the same rubric of my own cause, i.e. a backs against the wall cause. There was a demolition threat against the Coliseum, and a citizen group comes together out of nowhere and saves the place, right? And certainly there are similar causes, people protecting our aquifer against polluting companies. I interviewed a group, saved the East Phillips Depot in Minneapolis on the road trip last year. That type of, but I've learned that what it means to champion a cause can mean a whole lot of things. Like for instance, another episode on the podcast Road Trip was Michelle Brown. She's an educator in Oakland, California, that realized that neurodiverse kids were getting in trouble, having poor grades, and getting in fights after school. She realized that they needed different types of education. She said she had done her master's degree work on risky play. And all of a sudden,
I remember that episode.
Yeah. So she leverages all this stuff, and all of a sudden these kids are blowing glass and climbing rocks, getting better grades, staying out of trouble. And it's like, at the outset, I'm not sure I would have looked at that and thought, oh, that's a cause. But that's absolutely a cause. And she championed it, and those kids' lives are better off.
Well, speaking of kids, the last 20 episodes, the ones that I have overseen, maybe except for one or two, were part of this Champions of the Lost Causes summer road trip, which you took your kids on.
Yeah.
And you had your son Cormac producing, doing, Eric's job now.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was that whole experience like? I mean, one, collaborating with your kids on the project, and two, moving the podcast around and, talking to some folks outside of Memphis.
Sure. I'm a Memphis homer, and so most of my early episodes were about Memphis causes. A few via Zoom episodes on other cities, and even one international, Svetlana Muzichenko and the efforts to raise funds for things going on in the war in Ukraine. But I really wanted to get out there on the road and see things happening for myself and meet people face to face. Zoom is fantastic, but I wanted to get out there on the road, kind of Charles Kuralt style, if you will, which is, I know, a completely dated reference for those out there wondering who Charles Kuralt is. Is it On the Road with Charles Kuralt?
No. Oh, I thought he was part of the CBS Sunday Morning. Isn't that?
I'm sure he was.
Yeah.
But regardless,
that's what I think of him as. But yes, that's Charles
Kuralt.
Dated.
It's super dated.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us about some Morse codes that you listened to in the back in the 40s?
Yeah, back in the 40s. But seriously. I wanted to get out on the road, and I assumed that causes are being championed all over the world, and indeed that's what I found. What I was able to do with, honestly, my wife Sarah thought I was a little bit crazy when I said I was going to strike out across the country and interview people
and take our children with you.
Take our children and employ them. But the loose working idea was that my son Cormac, who at the time was 12, would run the gear and record the audio. Our oldest, Vive, home from college, would help with the driving, and that was our plan. And I kind of booked the tour, so to speak, DIY style, like many Pez punk rock tours back in the day. You just reach out to a given city. I did my own research, tried as best I could to find nonprofits in a given city. I partnered also with IOBI, not only on for the crowdfunding aspect of it, but I worked with their marketing director, Katie Laura, to identify IOBI project leaders across the country. So a few of the episodes, the connection was through IOBI. So we booked the thing and we headed out. We built a budget. We started a crowdfunding campaign, and I just sent out crowdfunding messages literally the entire 5 weeks I was out on the road and the 2 weeks after I got home. And thankfully, people responded, and we crowdfunded a little more than $16,000. And to take 3 people and occasionally we tried to stay with friends where we could, but we had to stay at some hotels. We had to purchase some meals. Grocery shopping, gas is expensive. So we had some real expenses out on the road, and thankfully our IOBI donors really responded, and so the entire trip was in the black.
That's great.
Yeah, and I guess the other piece of that is being out on the road with my kids was really, really rewarding and fun. Our middle child, Amelia. She had been on a school trip to Costa Rica, so she couldn't go on the entire thing with us. But at a certain point, she was going to fly home from a conference trip with my wife, Sarah. And I said, why don't you just look at what a ticket to Seattle would be like? Turned out it was cheaper than flying her home to Memphis. And I said, ask her if she wants to join for the last 2 weeks. So she did. She flew out to Seattle. So for the last 2 weeks, I had all 3 kids in the Murano with me. It was fun.
Was it enough fun to where you think you'll do it again?
The hope is that we will do it again. East Coast this time. I have put air quotes pen to paper to start to look at a routing. However, Amelia is looking at some summer camps and some fellowships, some art fellowships that she's applying for. That might change the calculus. Also, she's a junior in high school, so she's looking. Sarah and I and her are talking about, where are you going to go to college? Well, some of those colleges are in New York State. So if we could combine, visiting a couple of colleges along the way, and just run the table. I'm
As
in
you all
hopes.
want.
Yeah, I'm in hopes to go on an East Coast summer road trip this summer, but it's early days of planning.
Yeah. And I know you have a lot of projects in the hopper. There are certain things that maybe we can't talk about right now, but there are certain things that, should they come to fruition.
Yes, there are some things some work projects that I'm not at liberty to talk about right now.
That's so cool to say in the podcast, though.
Okay. I'll be honest. It's totally. Yeah, no, but I look forward to sharing more on that, and it actually does dovetail over into the theme of championing causes. Honestly,
yes, God willing, we'll be doing a whole separate episode about this thing that we cannot talk about
or
right
a
now.
series of episodes. Yeah. No, we will. Excited about that, but not sure exactly how that's going to pan out, and that will probably affect how we go and do the podcast road trip this summer.
That's a teaser.
It's a total teaser.
So Champions of the Lost Causes actually started, in your mind, I think, as a book, right? Not necessarily as a podcast. You've done 58 episodes of the podcast, so I think that's what people primarily identify it as at the moment, or as at the moment. But the book is still in the works, right?
It is in the works, and I did a spot for the book, some that listeners may have heard, and I ambitiously was like, "Well, this is the year that I'm going to get the book done." And then, of course, that year came and went, and it didn't get done. I've never written a book before, so the how to do it part is it's been a learning process. Where we are right now is I have brought in a developmental editor. That's helping me with the manuscript. She has read all 177,000 words, which...
That's a lot of words.
It's a lot of words. Quite frankly, it's about twice as many words as your average narrative nonfiction big idea book, which is what my editor tells me I've written.
Right.
So
did you tell her that you wanted to be more than average?
I didn't think to make that joke. No, but obviously I want to strike the balance between letting the book be what it's supposed to be, but also be aware of market trends and reader attention spans. I mean, that's essentially what I brought the developmental editor in to do. So it did start in 2018. I got curious. I started to think about. It was the 4-year anniversary of the Coliseum cause really beginning. 4 years since that fateful day that Mike McCarthy and I had the conversation, which led to us championing the cause to save the Coliseum. And I just got curious about why I had the fire in the gut. I'm like, I've been at this for 4 years. Why do I care this much? And then that extrapolated into, why does anyone care enough to invest themselves in projects that there's not, most often, not a traditional metric of success and reward?
When you were asking yourself that question for yourself with the Coliseum, what did you land on?
Well, I mean, I think ours was a cause. We were formed in crisis. A crisis demands an answer. And it's like, I thought it would be an absolute shame if the Mid-South Coliseum were to be bulldozed. That was what was being proposed. And I really started to I tried to be the good friend at first. Well, this isn't my fight. It's my friend Mike McCarthy's fight. And being a PR guy, I'll help him get an op-ed in the paper, So I was trying to help from afar, but you get sucked in, right? And
like the Godfather.
There was a fateful night where we had publicized this Fairgrounds Forum. Restaurateur Taylor Berger and I put together this thing called Fairgrounds Forum. He didn't like the tourism development zone. We wanted to save the Coliseum. We packed out Circuit Playhouse. All the media came. And my goal that night was to be the PR guy and set up Mike to do all the interviews. But then one TV station said, "Hey, man, I got a filing deadline. Can you do the interview?" And I said, "Well, Mike's really your man." And I looked over. He was just beginning to do the next interview. So I realized that I wouldn't that if they didn't get comment from us, it would lean toward the city's opinion. And I realized I either had to do it or we were going to miss out. So I did the segment, and later on I caught up with Mike, and Mike just said, well, you do this all the time. No big deal. I'm glad you did it, And then as I was driving home, and some of that we had to stay late and clean up and all this jazz. And as I was driving home, my phone starts blowing up, and some of the media had started to be on television and stuff, or appear on social media. And lots of people were asking, what are you and Mike going to do next? And that's when I knew, okay, crap, I'm up in it now. So it really, I kind of almost got pulled into it. I didn't even realize, I did not say, I know what I'll do. I'll champion this cause, like Powdered Toast Man or something. You leave everything to me, No, it wasn't like that at all. I just thought I was trying to help a friend sound off in the paper. And then I got pulled in because I couldn't not do it. That's the thing. And I see
because
this,
of your personal connection to the building also, not just because of its historical
100%
value to the community. And,
it's all that.
Yeah,
it's all that. It's the memories of the building that I have. It's the utility. I'm a big fan of adaptive reuse. I think, reusing a building is the greenest way. It's like there's an environmental cost to build a new building. There are a host of reasons to reuse old buildings, and not to mention there's so much character in that building. So for a host of reasons, I was passionate about it, and I found myself immediately surrounded by other people who are passionate about it. And it has that kind of group galvanizing effect that you kind of like build each other up as a unit. So, so I got curious as to how that happens, not so much for what were my reasons at the outset, because that assumes that it's a logical left brain decision. It's not. You get drawn into it almost, and I see this across a lot of interviews. People do the same thing. They want to kind of approach on the edges, and then they can't resist, and they get kind of pulled into it,
While we were talking about it,
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead and update things on the Coliseum, like where things stand right now?
Oh, sure. So, gosh, lo these many years that we've been championing the cause of the Coliseum, about 9 years now. We gave, there have been 2 demolition threats on the building, and the building has survived twice now. The most recent one was Mayor Strickland's plan to build a soccer stadium for the 901 FC soccer team. And as people inside Memphis who've been following the story, but just for those not following it, essentially the city of Memphis received a group, an amount of state funding to handle a host of stadium projects. And in the end analysis, they had 4 stadium projects: FedEx Forum, Liberty Stadium, AutoZone Park, and 901 FC soccer stadium. And it's like, it became obvious that the first 2 priorities, FedEx Forum and Liberty Stadium, were going to take up all the money. And in fact, they're still shy some money just to get Liberty Stadium done. Didn't
Fred Smith have to step in and pledge a bunch of money just to make the Tigers and the Grizzlies not want to fight each other?
Yeah. And I mean, yes, Fred Smith ponied up $50 million, but the University of Memphis, as part of that, still has to go raise some money. So they talked a great game about how they were going to do all these stadium projects, but in the end analysis, they only really had enough money, and not even that much, to do the top 2. So, okay, so the Coliseum lives to fight another day. Another significant, and so over the years, we have given VIP tours of the Coliseum to potential investors, but the problem has always been that when we get a great out-of-town investor, and those have happened, we point them to our city leaders, and it just never went anything. It never went anywhere under Jim Strickland, because I think in hindsight we can just look at that and say he never planned to reopen the building. I think for the Coliseum to have been opened under Jim Strickland's watch would have required somebody to kick the door in with a giant bag of money and say, we'll take the whole thing off your hands, no problem. And surprise, that didn't happen. As we record here at the Memphis Listening Lab here at Crosstown Concourse, Crosstown Concourse is really instructive here. Think about the civic effort it took across tons of organizations, our city, our county, philanthropy, all sorts of players over many years of effort, reimagined this building and brought it back to life. So I just don't think that the Strickland administration was ever serious about the Coliseum. They never issued a request for proposals. I mean, if you're trying to sell your house, you put a sign in the yard, right? Well, the city of Memphis never, air quotes, put a sign in the yard to say that the Coliseum was available. So so now that Mayor Strickland is out of office and Paul Young is the mayor, Paul Young and I got to be friends because of the Coliseum. He was the head of housing and community development. I was the spokesperson for the Coliseum Coalition. So we had to coordinate a good bit, actually.
Do you think he's open to actually seeing this through to the end zone, as they say? Or, I mean, do you think he's is he open to the conversation, or is it an actual agenda item for him to deal with it?
Well, I think he's consumed with a lot of other more pressing things right now. But
Sure.
The answer to your question is yes, I do believe Paul is open to a solution coming forward to the Coliseum. Why do I say that? We did 2 years of pre-development work with a consultant, consultant Scott Boyko, who helped reimagine Crosstown Concourse, and so we've done the pre-development work, and we have a handle on what we think the mix of uses that could work for the Coliseum. But more than that, it's going to take political will, and it's going to take, quite frankly, people with connections that we at the Coliseum Coalition do not have. So just recently, the Coliseum Conservancy was incorporated and announced its board. And these are a group of business leaders that will act alongside us to find redevelopment ideas and bring investors to the table. Now, in the past, we would bring investors to the table, but it just wouldn't go anywhere because the Strickland administration wasn't interested in hearing from those people. I'm in hopes that the Coliseum Conservancy will be able to not only bring different people to bear, but that our city or city council will deputize that group to redevelop the Coliseum. And then I think there'll be a further role for us in the Coliseum Coalition to play. If you take the Crosstown Concourse example, there was Crosstown Arts, which was the arts org that beat the civic drum of enthusiasm and said, wouldn't it be cool to reopen this building? But then you had the other group called Crosstown Development that most people don't really think about very often because, they were the kind of behind the scenes group. So Todd Richardson and McLean Wilson crunching the numbers, doing the pro formas, talking to the bank. So I think what we have now is a similar duality. The Coliseum Conservancy working in tandem with those long-serving of us in the Coliseum Coalition. I'm confident that we can get it done. And why wouldn't Paul, if a bunch of business leaders are going to knock themselves out to go find investment, why wouldn't Paul just say, well, let them go take a run at that? I mean, and if it works, that's an accomplishment for him as mayor. I'm sure it won't be as easy as that, but that's the reason they call it work. I mean, there's still work to be done.
Yeah. I mean, I like that you're optimistic still, despite, it's been a while since we've heard something, honestly. Like everyone kind of freaked out for a while when all the news came out about the funding and,
sure,
wanting to bulldoze the Coliseum for a soccer stadium, which is, not going to happen.
Not to mention the soccer stadium can be built all sorts of different places. It didn't need to be built where the Coliseum is. I mean, that would have taken on $10 million worth of
and I mean, let's be
cost.
honest, they're probably fine playing at AutoZone Park also.
Well, there is a thing where they
I know they're supposed, like the league they're in.
Yeah. It's
wants
either,
them to have their own stadium, but
yeah, there is a looming deadline for them to get out of baseball stadiums, and there is a considerable cost to change the thing over and all that jazz. I know it has become convincing to some of the people on our city council that they could also just play it at Liberty Stadium. I know that's not ideal. I know they don't draw that many crowds, so the stands will look empty. I totally get that, but I'm just saying, like, there are other options, and now that they've run out of money, they will have to go find those. I mean, I think, trust me. I mean, 901 FC is a cool thing. It's good for Memphis.
I have it on my to-do list to go to a game this year.
Yeah, we should go. I've heard great things. So like I'm for them. I want them to be successful, but I never thought it made sense to bulldoze the Coliseum. I see that as Mayor Strickland trying to like kill two birds with one stone, and he didn't get there.
Yeah. All right, well, let's keep talking about your work, actually, because you've also started your own company.
Yeah.
Or your own brand or whatever. Champion the Cause. Do you call it Champion the Cause PR or just Champion the Cause?
Champion the Cause.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do PR at the behest of clients.
That's the primary function of it, right?
Totally. I mean, the kind of wider communications umbrella has come to encompass a lot. But what I do, what I find myself specializing in is really one of the oldest parts of the comms toolkit, and that's just good old-fashioned earned media. I help get clients media coverage. Now,
and for those who aren't like totally in with the lingo of what earned media, you're talking about getting, newspaper articles written, interviews in local TV or national TV, whatever, getting them podcast, radio interviews, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that has evolved, but in the end analysis, it's getting press coverage. Now, what constitutes the press? I mean, even this podcast, I would argue, is journalism. It's long-form journalism. So
you're earning your own media right now.
I'm earning my own media. I pitched myself on the idea and then greenlit the thing.
Yeah.
No,
it's a go.
It's a go. Yeah,
that's a go project, Marvin.
Yeah, although I do not think I have the objectivity a journalist should have. No, but
I mean, I want to talk about it, nor should you. I mean, it's your show.
No, it's my show.
Promote yourself.
Right, exactly. No, but I mean, the media has changed, but I think the media's dead is premature, and I think in the pandemic, the journalism kind of caught its wind because it's like, yes, having some content creator out there on Instagram is great. And can you pick up useful information on social media channels through content creators? Absolutely. But when it comes to like really important issues like the pandemic, journalism had a responsibility to go cover that. Journalism has a responsibility to hold government accountable, and that's not as easily commodifiable into a content platform. So I think the media still exists. I would argue that in a healthy democracy, we need unbiased finders of fact. I had a coffee with a journalist friend of mine this morning. I think we have actually a really enviable media mix here in Memphis with the Daily Memphian, Commercial Appeal, MLK 50, Memphis Business Journal, Tri-State Defender, Memphis Flyer, Memphis Magazine. Not all, in fact, it is increasingly rare for cities to have two daily news sources. That's really uncommon. So I don't think the media is dead. But what the advantage for me is a lot of clients in the last 10 years have begun, organizations, typically nonprofits, but not always, have begun to focus on their own blog, their own newsletter, their own social media platforms. Now those are very good things to do. I'm not saying you shouldn't do those things, but for your smaller nonprofits, small to the smaller of the midsize, I would argue that they can still reach outside their typical quote broadcast range by getting a big feature story in the Daily Memphian or the Commercial Appeal. So it's like, I think a lot of people have said, oh yeah, getting press, like, how do you even do that? And I think getting media coverage requires an interconnected set of competencies that not everybody has, and that's become my specialty.
Yeah. I know something about that too, and once we're done with this, I'll tell you about a hilarious pitch email I got for Back to the Light.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, and increasingly I'm pitching podcasts too. Yeah.
It's ludicrous. Before we call this a podcast, let's talk about what you want to do with the show moving forward. Mm-hmm. What can listeners expect, and what do you want to do differently? What do you want to do better? Mm-hmm. The whole thing.
Well, first off, and I should give you props on this, JD, because one of the reasons that you're valuable as a producer is that not only that do you know how to like edit audio and make it its best. But you also, and this goes back to our days working on the Rock for Love benefit show for Church Health, is that you're an idea guy. And so like having that objective friend that's going to see things a little bit different than you will. It's like, well, it's kind of like a producer in the studio, right? It's like, it helps you think of the things you're not thinking of. I want the show to keep being better on all fronts. Like I said, hopefully there will be an East Coast podcast road trip. I also want to get back to some themes that I've explored and maybe do a couple more panel episodes. Like so far in my 58 episodes, I've only done one panel discussion episode.
I know, I was on it.
I know. The people who champion Memphis music causes here at the Listening Lab, as a matter of fact. And I love the live podcast feel, and I like the panel, concept or framing. And so I want to do more of that.
Cosset Library is probably a good spot for that.
Totally.
Yeah.
So, I talked a bit about PR and then journalism. I'm really interested in that connection, and I would really like to convene a panel about the future of journalism. Like, we might not have a quote news desert in Memphis, but I would argue that we have a bit of a feature news desert. There is not enough robust reporting on music, film, arts, and culture in Memphis. I would say that's getting better, but
that's sort of what we talked about on the panel we did here, honestly.
We did touch on that as it related to music. Yeah.
I think you could apply that discussion to any other, creative discipline in town.
Sure.
When's the last time you read an article about a podcast?
Not recently.
Yeah.
Not recently. But I just think, to cover, especially with Memphis being the type of city that it is, if to not cover our music, film, arts, and culture is to not really give people an adequate picture of their city.
It's a music town.
It's a music town.
It's like when you cross the bridge, that's what they have in Nia. It's like home of the blues, birthplace of rock and roll, right? Right there.
Yeah, so I dug through old emails, and I happened to run across an email from like 2009 or something, where somebody was saying, "Hey, who are the music writers that I need to pitch because I've got a new EP coming out?" And I sent them back a list of 17 people, and it's like there's not that much in Memphis. My friend Holly Whitfield over at the Daily Memphian is really kind of working on to help the Daily Memphian be better on that front. And I think the Daily Memphian was really smart to hire Holly away from the I Love Memphis blog. Holly's really smart. And I have noticed that the Daily Memphian is doing a better job at music, film, arts, and culture, and just featuring it better. And I just think more of that needs to be done. I mean, and here's, I think, what's changed, and I think what's really caused the crisis and why I think journalism needs to step up on this front. And that's that, in the early aughts, I think, when Facebook events were like a brand new tool, right? We could push out a Facebook event and get folks to come out to our show. Well, now the social media algorithm is less forgiving unless you pay. And I think a lot of smaller, if you're a large org or, if you're a major label or something, you can pay for paid social media strategies. But I think your average kind of indie rock band looking to play the high tone is like, do I really want to goose this thing $200 to reach my fan base? And it seems kind of unfair. Seems like a bait and switch, like here's this new tool. At that time, I think journalism said, oh, gosh, we need to cut costs. Thank God this new thing, social media, showed up. Yeah, what's that? Yeah, the bands they can promote themselves. Okay, yeah, gut the feature staff, right? And I don't think that was an overnight decision, but like over time, media outlets have winnowed away their feature coverage, right?
When I was a music writer for The Flyer, they told me constantly that, the reason why the space got cut was because, the reader numbers weren't reflective of tremendous interest.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know, like, I did some kind of pro bono pitching for my buddy Mike McCarthy around the sculpture stuff that he's doing. I got him a story in the Daily Memphian. And it got a lot of traction. So I think that's proof that a music, film, arts, and culture story can do well in terms of metrics. But yeah, I think if you don't feature, it's kind of almost a chicken and the egg kind of thing. If you don't have music, film, arts, and culture in your publication, audiences don't know to expect it. They're not looking for it, right? So like if you feature it a little bit here and there, that's not setting the expectation that you can depend on this outlet for that. So I don't know. I don't have the grand solution, but my point is, if the social media algorithm makes it to where that's not an option for your average indie rock band, where do they go? You know, like your friend and mine, Jeff Hewlett, well, he starts to build an email newsletter, right? Like, I think we're starting to rely on some older tools. But I do think a piece of this is journalism needs to step up. And we need more music, film, arts, and culture by our kind of like air quotes traditional media, whatever that has evolved to come to mean, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. And we could probably use a dedicated arts publication, honestly, but that's a whole nother thing.
Well,
it's
that's
a rabbit hole we probably don't need to go down, because I really want to bring this back to what you want to do with the show.
Right. One thing I'll say before we move on to that, and that is, you know, one of the projects I'm working with on the side with my friend Christopher Reyes is to bring back Live from Memphis. You know, Live from Memphis really functioned as kind of a quasi agency, but really kind of a media outlet. I know that when back in my days at Church Health,
I used to write news stories for it.
Exactly. And it's like they were coverage, right? I mean, if they covered you, they were essentially like a digital music, film, arts, and culture publication. And you know, it wasn't on us. It wasn't sustainable ultimately, and it folded in 2012. I think from a coverage perspective, the Memphis music and film scene especially, and just the wider art scene,
it could use something like that.
Exactly.
If not that, something like that. Something like the old, what was it, Shake, Rattle, and Roll magazine that used to
Shake,
come
Rattle,
out
and Roll.
in the 90s, late 80s and 90s.
Yeah, so Live from Memphis has been functionally kind of like resurrected a bit, but it doesn't. What it needs is some type of seed funding such that Chris and I could hire up a next-gen squad of 20s and 30-somethings, because Live from Memphis can't be fueled by 54-year-old men, you know, going to cover shows. It's just not going to work. But right now, we cover what we can. And if Chris is going to be at an event, he's going to be shooting video or he's going to be shooting photos, and he's got the time to make a post, he does. So one of the projects that Chris and I undertook is a reboot of Memphis Rock and Romp. So that was a success. We had a Halloween show, and now we'll probably have a Rock and Romp in the spring sometime.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Well, let's get back to the show.
Yeah. So back to, you know, I've been thinking for the longest time that, and you and I have had some conversations with the people at the Public Radio Exchange. My long-term goal, if I could wave a magic wand, is that Champions of the Lost Causes would be a public radio show. But right now, with all the projects on my plate and wanting to finish the books, I just kind of was honest with myself and thought to myself, that's still a goal, but I'm going to put it on the back burner, focus on finishing the book. And one of the things I didn't mention is that what I'd like to do with the East Coast podcast road trip is also block some time to meet with some literary agents and publishers in New York. I still think that's possible. My developmental editor says that she can have my book proposals and query letters ready to go by then. So still working toward that goal, but it's just like you can't proceed on all fronts, right? So what I've done instead in coordination with you is just to say, let's set down a path to do 10 more episodes, and let's experiment with video. Let's do some different things, and let's try to learn, because, you know, if you're on Instagram or these other platforms, you realize that content creators do a certain suite of best practices things. You know, they post in a cadence and with a frequency that right now I don't have the bandwidth to go do, but I want to work toward that. So that's where I see the show going in the next 10 episodes. And ultimately, yeah, I would like to see it be as successful as it can. I'd like to see it have a terrestrial radio component. And I'll keep trying to get that done until it becomes obvious that can't work. I certainly think it can. And I've talked to my friends at WKNO. and they're saying increasingly lots of podcasts are trying to make lots of radio shows are podcasts, but podcasts going to terrestrial radio isn't as common, but it's not uncommon either.
It's not unheard of.
It's not unheard of. That's a better way to frame it.
Well, for these next 10, I mean, I'd like to try to put, if we can. I mean, there are a lot of ways we've talked about this, but I'd like to see if we can't put a little bit more of like the Marvin Stockwell heart and soul into these episodes. Make them. I mean, yes, we're going to have guests, but also like talk about your work, your experience, your, other creative life, even more, as a musician, get into more of you.
I think that's right. And actually that's something that you have done really well with Back to the Light, your podcast. And that I should take a page out of that. No, that's right. Honestly,
I mean, you could certainly have clients that you work with on to talk to them and, tie in your collaboration together. There's lots of things that you could do that would be both. They would serve a dual purpose of, self-promotion and, still being very much true to the show.
I think, it's probably a bit of a shyness thing. And
and it's not just promotion of self either. It's a sharing of self, it goes a lot deeper because people know when you're just strictly, trying to get somebody to buy something.
Yeah, the distinction between sharing of oneself and promoting oneself is a really key difference. And it reminds me of when I first got, nominated to participate in leadership programs, and people said, "Oh, it'll be great to network." And I remember I had a really bad opinion of what networking meant. It felt really smarmy and promoty.
It's an icky word.
To me, it's an icky word. It feels icky. Until I went through Leadership Memphis, and you realize you have to confront the fact that can I make a difference? Yes. Okay. Well, where can you make a difference? You can make a difference mainly through your sphere of influence. So if you have a wider sphere of influence, you can make a bigger difference. So I thought to myself, and over the course of that program, I realized, okay, networking doesn't have to be smarmy if I take the right attitude into it. It's the same thing here. It's like I don't have to view talking about myself as self-promotion, but just being honest and being transparent and sharing who I am, because honestly, quite frankly, yes, it was my own champion's journey, championing the cause of the Mid-South Coliseum that led me down this path. Why wouldn't I share more about the kind of origins of it and the ongoing work piece of it? Yeah.
And the end result, if you share more of yourself, is that it will function as promotion also.
That's true.
I think that'll actually probably draw more people into wanting to work with you. On a professional level, as if they really get to know you, not just like
that's probably right.
Not just hear the sales pitch.
I mean, if anything, swapping places and being the guest on my own show is kind of an admission of that, or kind of acting in concert with that already. Because
but you've done before. You did one of these before with a different guest host.
Yeah, a long time ago when I really thought I knew something about all this stuff, but it's like, needless to say that I've learned a good bit.
I corrected you on that.
Yeah. No, for sure. Kyle Wagenschutz interviewed me.
Shout out.
Yeah, shout out Kyle Wagenschutz, my old While I Breathe I Hope bass player friend.
Yeah. And you guys put out a record together.
We did. Yeah, on
we recorded.
Yeah, that's right.
At my
Many moons.
I worked on more of the Pez side of it. I don't think I worked on very much of the While I Breathe side.
Yeah, no, I think they just had the songs ready to go before we even started talking to them.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, is there anything you want to get into before we call it a day here?
I
think we pretty much did it. We did your list.
My list.
I checked all 9 bullets.
Good. No, man. I just I appreciate you swapping chairs with me and interviewing me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Take us home.
Thanks for listening. You can learn more at championsoftheLostCauses.org. Our show is on Spotify and where else?
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and you can also find it at the network tab at backtothelight.net.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.